Ah, my weary travelling friend. Come closer, seeker of fate's design. For tonight, I must speak of times when the heavens align to test foundations of existence itself. The voice that calls to you belongs to one who has stood in ancient observatories, where telescopes track the dance of stars, where prophecies older than civilization reveal their secrets to those who know how to read the language written in starlight and shadow. This chronicle unfolds in the monastery towers that pierce the sky like fingers reaching for divine knowledge, where celestial conjunctions unseen for a millennium herald moments when the fate of all reality hangs in the balance. It is a tale of unlikely heroes whose names are unwritten in any legend, of choices that seem foolish until their cosmic significance becomes clear, and of the terrible truth that sometimes the survival of existence itself depends not on gods or kings, but on ordinary souls who simply refuse to surrender when surrender seems the only rational choice. Prepare yourself for the weight of ultimate destiny, friend, as I share the final prophecy. In the observatory tower of the High Moor's most remote monastery, where ancient telescopes track the movements of stars and planets in their eternal dance across the heavens, Seer Lyralei studied celestial configurations that had not appeared in the sky for over 1,000 years. The conjunction she was witnessing was one that she had prophesied in the oldest texts, described in languages that predated most civilizations, and spoke of times when the very foundations of reality would be tested by forces that sought to remake the world according to their own vision. The monastery itself was a marvel of ancient engineering, its towers rising from the moorland like fingers reaching toward divine knowledge. Their stones quarried from mountains that had witnessed the birth and death of empires, built by an order of monk astronomers whose names had been long lost to history, but whose wisdom lived on in carefully preserved instruments they had created. It had served for centuries as a sanctuary for those who sought to understand the will of the gods by reading the messages written in starlight and planetary motion. The current inhabitants were few in number, but profound in their dedication to the ancient art of celestial observation and prophetic interpretation, spending their lives in contemplation of patterns that revealed truths too vast for ordinary minds to grasp. They lived simply, sustained by gardens tended with the same careful attention they gave to their astronomical observations, finding in the rhythm of seasons and the cycle of growing things a reflection of the greater rhythms that governed all existence. Lyralei had come to the monastery as a young woman fleeing a war that had consumed her homeland, seeking nothing more than a place of safety, where she could mourn her losses in peace, and perhaps find some meaning in the suffering that had driven her from everything she had ever known. But the ancient texts had recognized something in her that she had not known existed, a gift for reading the cosmic patterns that connected the movements of celestial bodies to the fate of nations and individuals, an ability to see beyond the surface appearance of astronomical events to the deeper meanings they contained. Under the tutelage of masters whose knowledge spanned centuries and whose understanding reached into realms that few mortals ever glimpsed, she had learned to see the night sky not as a collection of distant lights, but as a vast book written in a language of motion and light, positioning and timing. That revealed the intentions of powers beyond mortal comprehension. Each star had its own story, each planet its purpose in the great work that connected all things in patterns of meaning that stretched from the smallest details of individual lives to the largest movements of cosmic history. Tonight, As she adjusted the complex array of lenses and mirrors that comprised the monastery's great telescope, she was witnessing the culmination of patterns that had been building for decades. The conjunction of 5 specific stars, occurring at the same time as a rare alignment of 3 moons, had been described in the most ancient prophecies as the herald of a time when the barriers between the realms would weaken, and the fate of all existence would hang in the balance of choices made by mortals who might not even understand the cosmic significance of their actions. The prophecy was written in the Celestial Codex, a manuscript so old that its parchment seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and so sacred that only a handful of people in any generation were deemed worthy to read its contents. The text was written in a script that predated most known languages, its symbols carved with tools whose metal had been forged in fires that burned before the current age of the world begun. To read it was to touch the minds that had contemplated truths that modern scholars could barely imagine, to share in wisdom that had preserved across eons of time and change. The words of the prophecy were simple enough to understand, but their implications were staggering in scope and terrifying in their certainty.
When 5 become 1, and 1 becomes many, when the mother's children gather in the place of giants, when gold flows like water, and water burns like fire, then shall the ancient compact be tested, and the world shall choose its fate through the actions of the unlikely and the unlikely actions of heroes.
Lyralei had spent many years studying the prophecy's symbolism, cross-referencing its imagery with historical events and astronomical observations, building a comprehensive understanding of how the cosmic forces described in the ancient text manifested in the material world. The 5 become 1 clearly referred to the dragon masks that the cult was gathering, artifacts of terrible power that were said to contain fragments of Tiamat's own consciousness, waiting to be united in a working that would allow their dark goddess to return to the material plane with her full power intact. The Place of Giants could only mean Skyreach Castle, the ancient stronghold that the cult had claimed as their mobile headquarters. Built by cloud giants in an age when such beings walked freely among mortals and worked wonders that modern architects could only dream of achieving. The castle's ability to fly through the sky made it the perfect platform for a ritual that required specific astronomical conditions, allowing the cult to position themselves at exactly the right location when the celestial conjunction reached its peak. But it was the final line of the prophecy that troubled her most. The suggestion that the fate of the world would be decided not by gods or kings or ancient powers, but by individuals whose heroism was unexpected, people who would take action that defied conventional wisdom or reasonable calculation. The prophecy seemed to suggest that the cosmic forces that shape reality itself would ultimately be subject to the choices made by mortals whose only qualification was their willingness to do what others considered impossible. The astronomical event she was observing represented the opening of what the ancient text called a window of possibility, a brief period when the normal laws governing the interaction between different planes of existence would be temporarily suspended, allowing for magical workings that would normally be impossible to achieve. During this window, actions that would typically only have local consequences would be magnified far beyond their apparent scope, while the barriers that normally prevented direct intervention by divine and infernal powers would be weakened to the point where such intervention became not only possible but probable. But the window would remain open only for a limited time, measured not in years or even months, but in days or perhaps weeks at most. The forces seeking to exploit it were not limited to those who served the cause of good, but the cult's preparations suggested that they understood the timing involved better than anyone else who might seek to take advantage of the same cosmic conditions. The cult of the dragon had clearly been planning the great ritual to coincide with this conjunction, understanding that the weakened barriers between planes would allow them to summon their goddess with a degree of power and permanence that would normally be impossible to achieve. But the prophecy also suggested that the same window of possibility could be used to achieve other outcomes, that the cosmic forces would allow Tiamat's return to also be exploited by those who sought to prevent it. As Lyralei made her observations and recorded her measurements with the precision that her training demanded, she became aware of another presence in the observatory. Master Kaelin, the oldest of the Monetary Seers, and the one who had first recognized her potential for prophetic work, had climbed the tower's many stairs despite his advanced age and the pain that had clearly accompanied such exertion. His face bore the kind of deep concern that came from understanding implications that others might miss, while his eyes held the accumulated wisdom of someone who had spent decades understanding the intersection between cosmic forces and mortal affairs.
The conjunction is proceeding exactly as the prophecy predicted,
Lyralei reported, not taking her eyes away from the telescope's eyepiece as she made the careful observations that would be crucial for understanding the timing of what was to come.
The alignment will reach its peak in 3 days, and the window will remain open for approximately 1 lunar cycle before beginning to close. After that, the opportunity may not come again for more than a millennium.
And the other signs? Master Kaelin asked, settling into the chair that had been placed beside the great instrument for exactly such consultations. Have you been able to confirm the terrestrial events that should accompany the celestial conjunction? Lyralei gestured towards a collection of reports and messages that had been arriving at the monastery through various channels over the past several weeks. Carrier birds from distant kingdoms, magical communications from allied organizations, and coded messages from agents who moved through the world gathering intelligence for those who needed to know what was truly happening beyond the walls of their scholarly sanctuary. Each message had been carefully analysed and cross-referenced with the others, building a picture of events that confirmed the prophecy's accuracy in ways that were both reassuring and deeply troubling.
The cult has indeed gathered at least 4 or 5 dragon masks,
she confirmed, consulting notes that had been cross-referenced with multiple sources and verified through magical means that confirmed their authenticity.
Skywage Castle has been sighted moving toward what our calculations suggest is the optimal location for their ritual, following a path that will bring them to the precise coordinates where the celestial energies will be strongest. And the reports of gold flowing like water are being confirmed for multiple regions. The cult has been liquidating assets and converting everything possible into precious metals and gems that will fuel their working.
What of the final element? Master Kaelin asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who hoped that this particular aspect of the prophecy might prove to be metaphorical rather than literal. Water that burns like fire. This was the aspect of the prophecy that had proven most difficult to interpret. Its symbolism resistant to the kind of straightforward analysis that had clarified the other elements. But recent intelligence had provided a disturbing possibility that fit the prophetic description all too well, suggesting that the cult's preparations had advanced them even further than the most pessimistic estimates had indicated.
There are reports of strange weather patterns in the regions where the cult has been most active,
Lyralei said slowly, consulting messages that described phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of how the natural world was supposed to function.
Rain that falls from clear skies, but when it touches the ground, it ignites rather than provide moisture. Streams and rivers that have begun to burn despite containing what appears to be normal water. The local populations are fleeing these areas, claiming that the very air has become hostile to life.
Master Kalen nodded gravely, his expression showing the kind of deep sadness that came from witnessing the fulfillment of prophecies that had been hoped to be merely symbolic rather than the literal descriptions of coming events.
Then all the signs are aligned, and the time of testing has indeed arrived. The ancient compact that has maintained the stability of reality for millennia is about to face its greatest challenge. What of the heroes that the prophecy speaks of? Have you been able to identify those who will play crucial roles in the coming conflict?
This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of Lyralei's work, because the prophecy suggested that the key figures would be unlikely heroes, whose importance would not be obvious until they chose to act. Traditional methods of identifying important individuals, tracking bloodlines that carried special significance, monitoring the activities of powerful organizations, observing the movements of those with great wealth or political influence, were unlikely to reveal people whose significance lay in their willingness to take extraordinary action rather than their existing status or capabilities.
I have identified several possibilities,
Lyralei replied, producing a series of charts that mapped the interactions between celestial influences and terrestrial events, showing how cosmic forces manifested in the actions of individuals who might not even be aware of their cosmic significance.
A retired military officer who has been organising the defence of a frontier settlement despite having no official authority to do so. A scholar whose research has revealed crucial information about the cult's methods, even though her work was originally focused on purely academic questions. A group of unlikely allies who have been disrupting the cult's operations through a combination of courage and improvisation rather than careful planning or superior resources.
And their chances of success?
Master Kalen asked, though his tone suggested that he'd already suspected that the answer would not be entirely reassuring.
Unknown,
Lyralei admitted, her honestly reflecting the limitations of even the most sophisticated prophetic techniques when applied to events that involved the exercise of free will by individuals whose choices could not be predicted with certainty.
The prophecy suggests that their actions will be decisive, but it does not guarantee that those actions will be successful. The window of possibility works both ways. Just as it allows for the achievement of normally impossible good outcomes, it also permits the manifestation of normally impossible evil.
Master Kalen stood and moved to the chamber's great window, which offered a panoramic view of the night sky that few other locations in the known world could match. The stars that had guided human civilization for millennia continued their eternal dance, but tonight, their patterns held new meanings and terrible possibilities that would determine whether the civilization would continue to exist in any form that its current inhabitants would recognize.
Tell me about the ancient compact that the prophecy mentions,
he said quietly.
What agreement is being tested? And between whom?
This aspect of the prophecy required knowledge that went back to the very foundations of the current cosmic order, to agreements made between powers that existed before most of the current pantheon of gods had achieved their divine status. Lyralei had spent months researching fragmentary references in texts that were considered too dangerous for general study, piecing together a picture of cosmic politics that revealed just how precarious the current balance between good and evil really was.
According to the oldest sources,
she began, drawing upon knowledge that had been preserved in forms that few modern scholars would recognize as legitimate historical documentation.
The current arrangement between the various planes of existence is not natural or inevitable, but the result of treaties and agreements made in the aftermath of conflicts that nearly destroyed reality itself. These compacts establish boundaries between realms, limitations on how various powers could interact with the material plane, protocols for resolving disputes without resorting to the kind of warfare that had been previously threatened to unravel the fundamental structure of existence.
And the return of Tiamat would violate these agreements?
Not simply violate them,
Lyralei replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the full implications of what she was describing.
it would potentially invalidate them entirely. Tiamat's banishment to the Nine Hells was one of the foundational elements of the current cosmic order, a cornerstone that supports numerous other agreements and arrangements. If she were to return to the material plane with all her power intact, it would demonstrate that the compacts could not be enforced, opening the way for other powers to ignore agreements that they previously respected.
The implications were staggering in scope, extending far beyond the immediate threat that the cult's activities posed to the communities and kingdoms that they were targeting. The return of the Dragon Queen would not simply mean the domination of chromatic dragons over other species, or even the establishment of a new empire based on principles of tyranny and destruction. It would signal the beginning of a new age of cosmic warfare as the various powers sought to renegotiate the fundamental laws that govern reality itself, potentially leading to conflicts that could tear apart the very fabric of existence.
Then the stakes are higher than most people realize,
Master Kalen observed, his voice carrying the kind of quiet certainty that came from understanding truths that were too large for most minds to encompass.
This is not a war between the cult and those who oppose them. It's a test of whether the cosmic order that has provided stability for millennia can survive when it's faced with a direct challenge to its fundamental principles.
Exactly.
Lyralei confirmed.
And the prophecy suggests that the outcome will be determined not by actions of cosmic powers who understand these larger implications, but by the choices made by mortal heroes whose understanding of what they're fighting for may be limited or completely absent. They may think they're simply trying to protect their communities or their loved ones, not realizing that the fate of reality itself depends on their willingness to take actions that defy every reasonable expectation.
The irony was both profound and terrifying. The fate of gods and demons, of entire planes of existence, was rest in the hands of individuals who might not even understand what they were fighting for. Their heroism would need to be motivated not by cosmic ambition or divine calling, but by simpler values: love for their communities, loyalty to their friends, determination to protect the innocent, or simple refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. As the night wore on, Lyralei and Master Kalen continued their vigil, monitoring the celestial conjunction while analysing the intelligence reports that painted an increasingly clear picture of the cult's final preparations. The ritual they were planning would take place at the conjunction's peak, using the accumulated power of the dragon masks and the vast treasure they had gathered to tear open the barriers between planes and provide their goddess with a pathway back to the material realm. But the prophecy also suggested that this same window of possibility could be used to achieve other outcomes, that the weakened barriers would allow Tiamat's return and also be exploited by those who sought to prevent it. The key was to understanding how to channel the available cosmic energies towards constructive rather than destructive purposes, using the same forces that threaten to unmake the world as tools for its preservation.
There is one more aspect of the prophecy we have not discussed,
Master Kalen said, as dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the observatory's windows, bringing an end to their night of observation and contemplation.
the reference to unlikely actions of heroes. What do you think this means in practical terms?
Lyralei had been pondering this question throughout the night, considering various possibilities while monitoring the cosmic forces that would soon determine the fate of everything she valued. The phrase suggested that the crucial actions would not be the ones that conventional wisdom would recommend, but choices that defied normal expectations about what heroes should do when faced with seemingly impossible challenges.
I think it means that victory will require someone to make a sacrifice that seems counterproductive in the short term, but creates possibilities that would not otherwise exist,
she said slowly, working through the implications of what she was suggesting.
Perhaps a hero who chooses to trust an enemy rather than fighting them, recognizing that cooperation might achieve what conflict cannot. Or someone who destroys something valuable in order to prevent it from being misused for purposes that would cause even greater harm. Or individuals who decide to work together despite having every reason to consider each other opponents.
The kind of choices that would seem foolish to anyone who didn't understand the larger pattern, Master Kalen agreed, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had spent decades studying the ways that cosmic forces manifested in individual actions. That makes sense only in the context of forces that most people never think about. Decisions that appear to be mistakes until their true consequences become apparent. As the monastery began to stir with activities of another day, Lyralei prepared to send her final reports to the various organizations and individuals who would need to know that the prophesied time had arrived. The networks of communication that connected the forces of good across the continent would carry word of the conjunction's significance, while agents and allies would begin their own preparations for the conflict that was coming. But she also understood that all the preparation and intelligence in the world would ultimately matter less than the decisions made by individuals whose names she might never learn, whose actions she might never witness, but whose courage would determine whether the ancient compact survived or whether reality itself would be reshaped according to the will of the Dragon Queen. The final prophecy had been read, the celestial signs had been interpreted, and the time of testing had begun. In observatories and temples, in taverns and town squares, in the hearts and minds of people who had never considered themselves heroes, the forces were gathering that would determine the fate of all existence. The stars had spoken their ancient language one last time, and now it remained only to discover whether mortals would prove worthy of the trust that cosmic forces had placed in their hands. The unlikely heroes were already moving towards their destinies, guided by nothing more than their conscience and courage, unaware that the very survival of reality depended on their willingness to take actions and would defy every reasonable expectation. The conjunction reached its peak as Lyralei completed her observations, the 5 prophesied stars blazing with unusual brightness, while 3 moons hung in perfect alignment above the ancient tower. Somewhere in the distance, the final act of an epic that had been written in starlight was about to begin. And all the Seers could do was watch and hope that the heroes would prove worthy of the faith that had been placed in them by powers beyond mortal comprehension. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I've countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it. Wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery, each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventure be worthy of legend, and may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.